welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. Here, we look closely at the intersections of the postpartum window, the Ayurvedic perspective on health and healing, and the universal mother principles that are the keys to giving and receiving effective care. Hello, I'm Christine Devlin Eck. I'll be taking you through interviews with professionals who are making a profound difference in the lives of their clients, conversations with individuals brave enough to share their stories of vulnerability as a way to lift up others, and my own journey through birth, parenting, caregiving, and building a conscious business. We are here to honor the sacred windows, the profound transitions in life that give it all meaning. Welcome to the conversation.
And I will never be the same again.
Welcome, everybody, to the Sacred Window podcast. My guest today has spent her career inside some of the most high-stakes rooms that the perinatal journey can hold, as lead for obstetrics care at Central Health London and consultant obstetrician at King's College Hospital. Dr. Kenga Sivarajah has guided thousands of women and families through both ordinary and extraordinary passages of pregnancy and birth. Her specialist interests in high-risk obstetrics, maternal medicine, perinatal mental health, and obstetric risk management have shaped not only the care that she gives, but also the systems that she's building. And it's these systems that I find particularly compelling. Dr. Sivarajah pioneered a joint obstetric psychiatry service in partnership with South London and Maudsley NHS Trust, bringing together two worlds that are so often operating in silos. And this is holding women with severe mental health conditions in a truly integrated and multidisciplinary way. And that work was nationally recognized with the Royal College of Midwives Award. And so what draws me really deeply to this conversation, though, is something that can't really be measured in awards or patient numbers, but how Dr. Sivarajah speaks about a woman's voice. And this is really pointing towards the conscious care model. Whether a person is weighing the decision around induction or navigating birth after trauma, trying to make sense of what their body is needing, their spirit is needing in the postpartum window. Kenga is bringing a rare and beautiful combination of medical excellence and also genuine human sacred window advocacy. And she's not just seeing the clinical picture. Kenga, I feel like you're seeing the person, and this is really important, as we both know. As labor ward lead at King's, she's held a vantage point on what families truly need in the postpartum window. She knows, as we know, that it's not only safety, it's autonomy, it's dignity, it's participation, it's partnership, it's being seen, it's being held, it's feeling cared for. So I'm so honored to welcome you into this space today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be welcomed on to the show.
I am really honored to have you. I don't think we've had anyone particularly on the podcast that we're having this specific conversation. And I think this is a really special opportunity for us to find ways of the medical model that we're all sort of work within to find common ground with the ways that people are falling through those cracks and the ways that traditional medicine, Ayurveda, being one of them, really helps to catch people. And so, like along those lines, thinking about what the medical model misses and what you have seen in those sort of gaps. So you've been in the heart of the Western medical system for your career. You're guiding people through, I think we can all agree that this is one of the most vulnerable and high stakes moments in life. And from this vantage point, witnessing families during their births, What are you feeling like the medical model most consistently overlooks in the postpartum window? Because I think you have a really unique perspective, which you talk about in your bio and in your work. Sort of looking past like the clinical safety, which you have this expertise in, but in terms of what people actually need to heal.
So I think currently, I mean, in the UK, I'm sure that, I think people have heard in the US that we are cash strapped on the NHS, and it feels a bit like a conveyor belt sometimes, that women are delivered and they are actually in four-bedded bays sometimes, basically listening to other babies and other women crying. And often they are not sleeping through the day or the night in the postnatal period. And then they're told to continuously breastfeed, but actually not given any of the tools or guidance that they need. So some babies will breastfeed very easily and, will take it to it like a duck to water, and some will not. And I feel actually they are too tired and too stressed and actually still trying to heal themselves from what is sometimes a difficult and long birth, to then trying to concentrate on kind of nurturing this little human and feeding human. Partners are often overlooked. They're often, made to kind of sleep in a chair, and they themselves are also exhausted. And you then get a couple that are quite lost and emotionally labile, and we wonder why lots of women don't continue to breastfeed, or people do get postnatal depression, because they often feel like they're failures. They're sold the story that, they should have this healthy glow and they should just be grateful to have their baby, and they feel tired. They're often teary and in pain, and feel slightly, and I think truthfully, that some women regret almost like having a baby at that point, because it feels like a bomb has hit their life. And I think we ignore all the things that we can do to make sure a woman stays well. So we do really need to try and kind of cut back to going probably in previous times where we did seek more help from family. So I think we underestimate family, friends. People say it takes a village, and it genuinely does. You genuinely need a lot of support in the postnatal period. I always ask that to people when they come to my clinics. I'm like, who is going to support you? And people often look at me really shocked. They're like, we're just going to do it, ourselves as a couple. And I'm like, okay, but do you understand that it's going to be really difficult, both of you, just two of you? And they underestimate, I think, how difficult it is to look after a baby in the first 6 weeks at least. So I always say to think about either support with your friends and family, or to think about more paid support, if you can, if your income will stretch that far. I think the other thing about breastfeeding I find is that, yes, we very much encourage breastfeeding, but not to an end where both the mum and the baby are, at the kind of point where it's desperation almost. There has to be a point where people move on and they are able to, think of other methods of feeding if they need to, but also that we need much more lactation support in the postnatal period. People seem to think that babies are just going to breastfeed instantly, and that is not the way with the majority of babies. And that lactation support really needs to be on a daily basis almost. So I think there needs to be more community support in women dropping by at clinics and getting that support continuously to be able to feed. And in order to feed, you need to be able to sleep and rest, because you're not going to produce breast milk if you're constantly tired. And I think mental health is really important at this time, assessing mental health regularly, knowing and your partner understanding what are your triggers, what do they need to look out for to see that your mental health is deteriorating, and what are you going to do for yourself in this period? Because often people just completely give up on themselves and look after a baby, and then they forget actually to take care of themselves.
100%. Yeah. So it's really like, we have this Western structure that, sort of helps us holds us during, that moment of sort of the necessity of what we need. But it's all of that, frankly, like the doula care,
Yeah.
where a person is given time with support and the space that they need, the pace that they need, the environment that they need, the
Yeah.
food that they need.
Yeah, so a mother's help, a doula, whatever we want to call it, there needs to be someone at home with you. In the Chinese culture, they actually will hire a kind of nanny or nurse to come and help them for 6 weeks afterwards, making the right foods in their culture. They're not allowed to leave the house for a month. They're not allowed to wash their hair for a month. They have all these customs. And actually, I think that's really about trying to nurture that the mum and the baby as much as possible, kind of cocooning them into this safe world and making sure they're well looked after. They've got food ready for them. They've got these broths. And I think, those women will be, breastfeeding easily in a couple of weeks because they are getting that rest. They're not trying to run around and do everything and do household chores and yeah.
It's like the expectation is there.
Yeah.
We rest. We rest for this amount of time, and there is help this amount of time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's a massive game changer in postpartum recovery and people moving forward to feel confident in their body, that they trust that their body knows how to heal. That also, I think, something that I thought about as I was listening to you was, this ability to understand that our needs are really synchronous with our baby's needs.
Yeah.
So rather than sort of just putting it all on, oh, I have to take care of the baby, have to take care of the baby, recognizing that actually pretty much we have the same concerns right now. We're paying attention to, our bottom, our incision, our digestion, our warmth, our sleep. All of these are sort of similar. Our nourishment, the way we're able to, it's like a very beautiful synchronous relationship that kind of gets bypassed in sort of the modern Western way of healing after birth. I'm curious in your experiences working with families, what you know how can aspects of this, very human care be brought more into the medical model to find that sort of buffer zone where it's a smoother transition? Maybe it's like emphasizing ways that, our Western practitioners can help us to understand the importance of creating community and seeking support in a way that, frankly, most people are sort of blindsided by that need. Like we don't think we're going to need it. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you have seen that has helped support people to understand that at a greater level.
So I definitely think having some of these kind of, I don't know if you have them in the States, but lactation workshops. So we have one on our postnatal ward at King's where women drop in and they actually sit around in a circle and they're talking to the women next to them. They're not just, a lot of the time in the postnatal ward you find now all the curtains are drawn across. You're not talking to the women across from you. My mum actually said when she had me just like 43 years ago, that everyone's curtains were open. They were all chatting to each other, making friends. And that just, meant that they felt already a sense of community within the hospital that they were in. And everyone was going through the same, ordeals and hurdles. So I think having these kind of lactation workshops makes people understand a bit better that breastfeeding is not easy for anyone. Maybe there's a rare woman whose baby is taken to it straight away, but I think that helps. And to have that follow up at home and I really think someone going home to see what the breastfeeding is like, it does seem like a huge expense, but I think that when people are in their own environment at home, they feel comfortable, and just that one-on-one help with breastfeeding can really, I think, tackle issues. And if they do establish long-term breastfeeding, that's 6 months usually, or a year of breastfeeding, which is remarkable compared to then babies who are having to go on to formula. And then I think also within the communities, we have something called NCT, which, there's other things like Happy Baby, Happy Mum, but people have already started these kind of friendship groups prior to having a baby. And I think when you're in 4 o'clock morning feed and having a group to WhatsApp, that understand what you're going through at that time with the same age baby as you, or having something to leave the house for, to go for a coffee or to go and take the baby swimming when they're a bit older, is actually a huge resource. And I think really just helps mental health. These women might not be your best friends forever, but they are there at kind of a special time in your life where you need that support.
100%. I love that. And yeah, I think the more circles and group opportunities that our hospital groups are hosting is so important. I'm forgetting the name of what this model is called. I had my babies at home, so I wasn't part of it, but one of the local midwifery groups at the hospital in my town has this sort of opportunity where it's a little bit like group care. So everyone who is pregnant around the same time, they're coming in for almost like these group prenatal visits, and they get to know each other a little bit during the whole pregnancy process. And then when they all start to give birth, it naturally lends itself to them maintaining these relationships and
Yeah,
gathering,
absolutely.
continuing to gather. And I love that model. And I think, I facilitated a new mom circle for a number of years, and I still see these women in community and their children are growing up and they're still connected with each other. There is something so powerful about being seen by other people who understand exactly, maybe not exactly, but they are going through their own thing at the same level of intensity that we are. And, when our medical system can really help to foster that and can make those connections. I think that is one thing that is totally possible. I understand the limitations of care and the number of patients we have and the number of hours we have and all of that. However, when we can collaborate and work together and make the connections of these are the doulas in the area, these are the lactation consultants, here's what we have here to help you connect with these people, and really emphasize to families that we're working with that the healing doesn't end when you leave the hospital. In fact, it's almost just beginning. There's a lot that we all do to hold you through this window.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a really important point. So often I find I do, NHS births and private births, and the women who are on private births with me, they will have already had that information, who's the lactation person to go to, who is a night nurse, who's a doula, where can I get extra help? Whereas I find that on the NHS, they don't have that help necessarily. And actually, we should be providing them with some kind of information booklet. We shouldn't just be presuming that they're going to go home and be able to do all this by themselves. And they want a recommendation that you trust, essentially, because it is a very vulnerable time in your life. And you want, like you said, that they just want this whole community of people to be on hand if they need help.
Right, right. And I think particularly for people who are first-time parents, and I think, one of the things that I was drawn to you through, the connection that we've made is your emphasis on people's voices. And I think when you're a first-time parent in particular, you almost don't know all the time what you need. It's like the outside, the practitioners are the experts, and we're sort of along for this ride. And I think a lot about care that sort of feels like we're silencing our voice and like seeking outside for understanding about what is going well or not well versus really connecting with our own body and connecting with what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And so this whole opportunity for shared decision making as part of the medical process, part of the healing process, part of the birth process. And so, in thinking about your work and commitment to honoring a woman's voice in her own care, um, in Ayurveda, we think about this conscious caregiving framework, and we talk a lot about autonomy, sovereignty, about really understanding ourself as our best Ayurvedic teacher, and the way that really we know our body best and we know our baby best, that's just the connection that is there. And so when you are, navigating your space with families, what have you witnessed when a woman is truly heard versus when she is not? And what shifts do you see, not just emotionally, but also physiologically when she's genuinely included in her own decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really comes from continuity of care. So it's something that I think you have probably more in the States than we do in the UK, but the UK system is quite fragmented. So you can end up seeing many different individuals, different midwives, different obstetricians throughout your journey here. And no one really gets a sense of who you are, what your wishes are, why you have those wishes, why you have those thoughts about your birth, what history have you had in the past, what history has your family had. There's a whole different kind of plethora of emotions and history that goes behind people's decision making in these like important times. And unless you have multiple meetings with someone and you really develop a relationship with them, that's really tricky for someone to understand in one meeting or two meetings. So I often really kind of drill back and try and see what they want out of their birth. What do they see as their ideal birth? Why do they see that as their ideal birth? What do they want out of their postpartum period? How do they want to feed? What is their family structure like already? What are people's expectations? And then I really work with them. So I don't push any kind of birth on people. I'm really honest about that. I don't have, a lot of people feel like obstetricians just want to do a C-section and get something over and done with. I don't think that is always the best for all women. I think for some women it is for various different reasons, but I don't think that. I think women who are motivated to have vaginal birth, I very much encourage them to do so. And I've also looked after women who've had previous cesarean sections and want to have a vaginal birth, which is obviously slightly more high risk. And I've had lots of women who have had very traumatic vaginal births. And I don't shy away from trying to get them another vaginal delivery. I just try and optimize the current birth to make sure that we are going to have a positive experience this time. So I think that is the key. I try and make sure that if I feel actually, oh, I'm like, well, the baby's quite big, what do you think? I tell them the information. I give them the information that I have medically, and then I let them make a decision. And there's not always a wrong and right decision. Sometimes, occasionally, there's something that's very black and white, but obstetrics is very gray. And so often I will then embark on that journey with them to try and explore and see what happens with their birth. And I know that lots of women actually just want to try. They want to see what happens with their bodies, and they don't mind how long they're in labor for. They don't mind necessarily with that they may have some intervention. We want to have a safe birth. We want to have women feeling safe, but they also want to have a positive experience out of it. So I think part of it is understanding the personality and history of these women and their families and really trying to, as you say, hear their voice. So I'm not trying to just plug them into put them in a pigeonhole and say, well, this is easier for everyone if you do this, because that's not what they want.
Oh, yeah. It's so what I'm hearing, for those of you who have been listening to this podcast for a long time or in our programs, that we talk about the universal mother principles and how that guides um, creates access to care that's truly effective. And so what I'm hearing from you, Kenga, is this Priority of listening, which is one of the universal mother principles. When we truly listen and try to seek to understand what's important, what are the areas of fear that might be coming up for this person? What are the past experiences? Um, what are things that could be roadblocks and what are things that feel really empowering and the priorities? And so when our care is guided by that, and I think, it could be very challenging for you and for other doctors and nurses and midwives who don't get the time that they know they would prefer to have to really understand and also to be able to like, okay, I've just had this really meaningful visit where this person has like shared all this with me. And now next time they come in, how can I properly like inform the full team so that the next person who's going to see them also has this background, which is frankly so key to a person feeling heard and so they don't have to repeat themselves or they maybe the next person isn't going to ask them this or I think that could be really challenging. How are you sharing your gifts and passion for caregiving with others? In a world where education and awareness around the postpartum window is lacking or missing from our modern systems, we have a profound opportunity to shift that paradigm. You may be a few simple offerings away from making a truly impactful difference in the lives of mothers and families in your community. We are here to support your journey in the ways that work best for you. Schedule a conscious care strategy session to meet one on one with me, and let's identify the right next step for you to begin a path of conscious care for new families that fits your life and your needs. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session to schedule a time that works best for you. That's www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session.
Yeah, and I think these conversations, you're right, they don't just take 15 minutes. They can't be done in a 15-minute appointment. They actually sometimes take hours of going through the information, making sure people understand the information that's told to them or any preconception. They may come into this scenario with lots of preconceptions about birth that maybe actually we can give some education about as caregivers, as medical people. And that often changes people's end decision sometimes once they have gone through all the risks and benefits of each bit. So yeah, I don't think that you can pigeonhole people into 15-minute appointments, unfortunately. That's very kind of it feels very short and people are only just starting to kind of scratch the surface of some of their anxieties. I also think that continuity in labor really matters. So if you've met the same person throughout your antenatal period and then you know that they're coming to your birth, that makes a huge difference. You trust that person, you've met them, you've told them, your birth plan, they understand you as an individual. They've met your partner. I think that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And it also means that when that person is going to give you suggestions for
Yeah,
healing afterwards, that you're more likely to listen. You're
yeah.
more likely to be like, okay, I'll pay attention to that. And something also occurred to me too is that, I think we do often as caregivers feel like we wish we had more time or we wish we could do more for this person or we wish that we could fix it, whatever it is. But there is something really powerful about even when we do have a smaller window of time or we know somebody else is going to come in, like when we are able to be fully present in that 15 minutes, it's almost like it doesn't like a meaningful connection and a feeling of safety and being cared for can be transmuted so quickly. And I'm remembering this moment of going into the local hospital for a breastfeeding clinic when I was like maybe 3 weeks postpartum, and it wasn't going well with nursing. I was in pain. I was like, my nipples were damaged. I was so defeated, like crying at the desk checking in. And this lactation consultant sat me down. She probably worked with me maybe 20 minutes, not long. But I will never forget like the difference between when I arrived and when I left, and the encouragement and the empowerment and some simple tools and like I think some nipple shields or something. Like she hooked me up with a whole new perspective, and it wasn't very long,
No,
but it
and
was meaningful.
again, we need to utilize our appointments better. Me kind of endlessly talking about something that doesn't really is not going to contribute to this person's end result is not going to help them. So I'm very much like in my antenatal clinic, I know that other people can do blood pressures and urines and things. So let's not waste time. Like, what would you like to hear about cesarean section? Like, let me tell you, as someone who does many of them, what my perspective is on it, and let's go through some of the questions. And I think you can then get a really good dialogue going between you and the woman, by kind of trying to like take out some of these routine things that we do over and over and over again that actually, I'm not saying blood pressures and urine aren't important, but I'm just saying in that particular appointment, I think that it's better to have that conversation and engage.
100%. And there is like a fine balance too between helping people to be informed, even if this is a tricky one for me because, while I never want to scare anybody or, talk about, scenarios that the person would rather not experience. So, for example, if they know they really want to have a vaginal birth, natural delivery, and it's also important to be informed about all the things so that we're not blindsided. Like I've said that word before in this conversation because I felt like I was blindsided by a few things that just didn't come up. And then when they did come up, I was like, what is
Well,
happening?
exactly. I mean, you don't want to be tackling that when you're in labor. You want to have thought about. So one of the common scenarios that you often see is people will come and request a cesarean section, and I see juniors all the time talking about the risks of cesarean section, but they then don't talk about the risks of vaginal delivery or the risks of an instrumental delivery, to compare it to. So they're not actually giving, women a full picture of what all the different risks and benefits are. We're just saying, well, these are risks of cesarean section because it's an operation, but actually there's other risks with vaginal delivery that you just mentioned that women often don't get told because it's physiological and natural, but there can be issues, serious issues. And I think everyone has all of these risks and benefits appeal to different people. So for one woman, they would not want to have an instrumental at all, whereas another woman would rather have an instrumental than a cesarean, for example. So it is very individualized.
It is.
It's very
Yeah,
individualized.
it is. And I think, along the lines of like helping people to be informed ahead of time, I think there's also this interesting area of talking about perinatal mental health, um, mood and anxiety disorders, where it's so prevalent, and yet, of course, we don't want to consider that that might happen to us. And yet, it's also such an important thing to ensure that people understand the connection between being supported, having a circle of care, having like an appropriate amount of rest and food. And so there's such a woven connection between um, mental health and good care. And I think, your work in the perinatal mental health speaks directly to something that Ayurveda has understood and practiced for thousands of years, and that the postpartum window is not simply physical recovery. It's this sort of reshaping, this like re-becoming, this re-understanding who we are as our hormones are shifting, It's honestly like a profound psychological and spiritual transition. We talk about Vata dosha, which governs the nervous system and the qualities of air and space, and this is going to increase dramatically in the postpartum window. And when it goes unsupported, when sort of that uh, helping to balance out that excess air and space element, what we see are things like anxiety and overwhelm, depletion, disconnection. And so when you are working in the mental health landscape for new parents, particularly birthing people, what are you seeing in connection of lack of care versus solid community and good care practices and how that impacts mental health?
So I think the women that we've seen where they've had, obviously some women will have, very real psychotic breakdowns, and that is usually very kind of, huge hormonal shifts going on. And some of those women, they would not have had a history of mental health ever before. And in pregnancy, that, is a very rapid, in postpartum, it's a very rapid change. It happens within hours.
Yeah.
Um, and usually there are, quite kind of strong delusions. And that's very rare that you see that. And we would, in the UK, we would, have a mental health crisis team that would see those women straight away. And we have mother and baby units where they can go to, where they can stay with their baby. It's really important they don't get separated from their baby, but then they can receive the help that they need in a really lovely, nurturing environment where there are nursery nurses to help with baby. And, there's people to help with postnatal healing, like exactly like you've just said, to try and ensure that the mum is sleeping well, fed well, the baby's well looked after. And these aren't like, kind of other psychiatric institutions. It's a very soft, gentle environment. I think on other hands, you do get more women with anxiety disorder and depression, and that's usually, people who've probably built up in their mind what their postnatal, no fault of their own. There is social media and pressure on us everywhere, and what their kind of postnatal period should look like, or what they should be doing with their baby, and they feel like they're a failure. And I think it's really important to be more honest, like as a community, about what it's really like to have a baby. I think even those of us who've had a baby sometimes forget really what we felt at 2 o'clock in the morning when we were crying our eyes out and we wanted to tear our nipples off our breasts. And everything was sore, and we just wanted to go to sleep. So we forget, I think, you kind of haze over it, don't you? Because definitely had another baby, so it couldn't have been that bad. Um, but I think we need to be much more honest and open about it. And we do need to get women to reach out and get more support, I think. I think that is the key. I mean, I remember my first baby having my mother, my husband, and myself all looking after this one person, and all of us were still exhausted. So trying to do it, some women are doing it by themselves, some women are just doing it with their partner, but I still feel like there needs to be more people helping. And I think the women I often see that really at the end point have not slept. They've not slept in weeks. If they really think about it, they've probably not had more than a couple of hours, which is not enough in
Yeah.
in weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not surprised that they do get postnatal depression.
100%. There's such a connection between it's really sort of that basic foundation of
Yeah.
care, sleep.
I think
And,
I would say whatever you do, you must sleep. You must have a block of 4 to at least 6 hours of sleep to try and get yourself through that. You may be able to survive 1 or 2 days like this, but then if you're going to go on in the next kind of few weeks, and practical things like cleaning the house, food, that has to be either, you know, kind of, use outside help or have a messy house for a few weeks. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I remember my midwives coming in and scolding me like it's too clean. You're moving around too much.
You're not like resting enough.
Yeah, yeah, but that's hard for me. Some people like I don't like it. So
I
it's
know. I mean, I was the same. I basically, they were like, sleep when your baby sleeps, but I couldn't because I had to hoover or clean something or have guests over. And I think, I look back and I should have taken it much more slowly. But I think also getting outside and actually enjoying things with the baby, not just perhaps over focusing. I mean, I've talked about, in the Chinese culture, staying in for a month, but there are people coming to the house and visiting you. And I think having social interaction really helps as well. Because it can be a very lonely time having a baby, I think. It's the first time in a woman's life often where they've been quite busy with work and they feel slightly isolated.
yes, yes, I remember feeling that. It's interesting because I love what you said earlier about how, there's not one way, and that's the same with finding ways that we feel settled. Like I talked about that vata aggravation where air and space, and this creates feelings of restlessness, feelings of not knowing what to do for ourselves to make us feel a little calmer, or that antsiness or that inability to sit still and feeling like we have to go clean, or um, so I think recognizing that this period of time is going to give us that
Yeah,
restlessness.
I think it's recognizing that you're going to lose control. For the first time for many women, they're going to lose control of sometimes their body physically of various different bits and of mentally. You can't control every single thing about a baby. It's really you really see it in quite a few professional women where they're so used to being able to manage things and manipulate things, you know, and it's the first time where people are like, no, I can't control this baby. I can't make it do what I want to do. And in a way, you need to embrace the chaos a little bit.
Yes. And that's where these, sort of routines around traditional practices like Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, it's built around creating the environment to handle all of that. And
Yeah, it's
that's
bringing an
where
inner
the
calm to the
yeah.
outside chaos in your world. And what, it could be yoga, it could be meditation, it could be any of those things, exercise. But I think, women need to take one part of their day, whatever's going on, and try and maintain that.
Mm. I agree. And it can come in small. It doesn't have to be like a whole huge thing. It can be, so individualized, maybe stepping outside, like you said, and just taking some deep breaths. Often, like I remember one of my babies always calmed down as soon as we'd go outside. So it was like a beautiful thing for both of us. So, as we sort of kind of wind down our conversation here, which I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you, Kenga. But thinking about like the future and moving forward and what integrated postpartum care can look like, sort of blending, the experiences people have in the hospitals and sort of helping to create a continuity of care like we've talked about. I think that we have an ability to be stronger when things are intersecting and working together versus this is better or this is better or I can't do that and I am doing this or whatever. There's the safety and expertise of medicine, and there's the wisdom and wholeness of conscious traditional care. And when you think about imagining an integrated postpartum support system, where someone has left the hospital or birth center and was held in a way that they felt safe, they felt honored, their body, their mind, their spirit, their voice. What might that look like to you?
So I think you need to start off with the birth if you're going to kind of talk about the postnatal period. And I think we can do much better in how we manage births. They can be actually much more, you know, kind of planned, I would say, better controlled. Like they don't need to go on for days and days. I don't think women need to feel exhausted by the end of their labor. They can, have a vaginal birth, but still feel, actually have slept, and feel refreshed at the end of it. And I think we need to give more guidance about how to look after their bodies. So like really actually saying to them, look, this is what you should be eating, this is how much you should be moving, much more information on how to look after yourself and what kind of care you should reach out for. But I'm gonna be a little bit controversial and say that we should think about the French method of postpartum care, where a lot of the women will go to retreats, and they will have a huge community there that will be looking after them, providing them with good nutrition. They'll be in a nice kind of countryside environment, and they'll be enjoying their baby, with their partner, but not worrying about some of the stresses of being at home managing alone, because there will be other people to support them with a baby. There'll be people on hand to ask about breastfeeding questions. And it's away from your house, so you'll genuinely be able to rest, and take care of yourself. And I think almost everyone, like us saying you're going to have 1 day or 6 hours in the hospital post-birth is nothing. It's nothing. How does that even help a woman? And a midwife coming to you to visit at home for, I don't know, an hour doesn't even touch the surface. So I think a much more extended stay somewhere that isn't hospital based, that is much more, as you say, taking into account your mental, needs and your physical needs.
I love that. I love that concept. And, for those who can't do something like that, how do you envision, postpartum care providers such as our community is? How do you envision that we could work together as medical practitioners and postpartum caregivers to help create
Right.
out?
More kind of like, I mean, everyone's got community centers. So even smaller like villages will have a community center. And I think bring those people together in one space. So you go and see your obstetrician, obstetrician checks you. If you've got any queries, bring all those people to the local space that you're not having to go to the hospital on your own, and see the obstetrician. They're coming out to you to see your community, and bring a lactation consultant there. Bring, have a yoga class going on at the same time, that you can come to. Have the other mums sitting there that you can have a coffee with. And I think bringing doulas and other kind of mothers' helps into that environment, pediatricians to see the baby, will be much more nurturing for women than having to go to a big hospital where they're sitting there for hours, their baby's hungry. So I think we need to bring it back into the community, but the physicians and the medical personnel need to do some traveling probably, and come back into those spaces.
I love that vision. I can totally see it. And I absolutely think that that is possible. And for, those of us, where maybe there isn't a physician who's going to do that, I think it's possible to create those within. So, for example, earlier I mentioned the sort of group prenatal care at that midwifery center. They had sort of a community room. And I could totally see, a group of lactation consultants, doulas,
Pediatricians.
yeah, people with
We'll
expertise.
find people within the community who probably have those roles, and they might not be able to do it every day, but they could definitely do it once a week.
Yeah.
And it is somewhere that's like a home from home, basically. Like, not maybe, certain women won't be able to. I mean, a retreat, I understand, is financially going to kind of be difficult for some people, and this is much easier actually to access for all women. And actually we'll see what else, what other women are out there in your community. Like, who else can you make friends with? Who can you make a connection with? Yeah.
So beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time and for all of the priority that you're putting on creating these bridges and creating better care for families. And I will be sure to have all of your information in our show notes, so folks can follow your work. And Kenga, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. pleasure to have you on.
Shanti, Shanti.
The Center for Sacred Window Studies has been training postpartum care providers, professionals who work with new families, and individuals passionate about postpartum care since 2018. We regularly host live free events alongside our online and in-person training and certification programs. Hop on our newsletter list to get direct access to all of our events and community support gatherings. Our mission is not only in training conscious postpartum care providers, but in fostering a robust, informed, and thriving community of postpartum professionals. Once you step inside, you're family forever. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com to add your email to our newsletter list. You can support our work by subscribing to the Sacred Window podcast and sharing with someone you know who would love it. Thanks for being here and participating in the culture-wide shift that recognizes the need for and the importance of conscious postpartum care.